Good morning and welcome to October Lunch and Learn, powered by Farmer. My name is Sheila Hawkins and I am head of the account management team here in Government Frameworks. Joining me is my esteemed colleague, Hardis van Dijk, who is manager of the technical team. And we're very excited to have you all here today. We will go through the agenda, but we're going to walk you through a complete procurement automation journey, showing you how Process Pro, Farmer, and Microsoft Business Central integrate seamlessly to handle everything from vendor creation to purchase orders to compliance and even invoice processing. So here's our agenda here, and we'll be starting off with PO requests in Process Pro. We'll be creating a vendor directly in Business Central from that request. We'll be storing and tagging documents in Farmer. We'll be managing vendor compliance with expiration tracking. We'll then return to finalize the PO. And finally, how emergency PO requests are handled instantly and routed for approval. We then have time, ample time for Q&A. So we really want you to take down your questions. Myself and Hardis are very excited to hear your thoughts on this session. And then we'll have closing and thank you. Over to you, Hardis, where you'll be taking us through the technical flow.
So thanks, Sheila. Thanks for the introduction, and welcome everyone. Hope you enjoyed the session with us. So I've started out with the share of Process Pro, and I'm going to be driving this technical session for you, and I'll be taking you through the guide and basically highlight all the value you can get from a municipal point of view.
And before Hardis opens the PO form, I want to pause and talk about how we use Process Pro. Internally and with our customers, it's the backbone of procurement automation. It streamlines processes end to end, reduces friction between departments, and keeps every transaction aligned with our business values of efficiency, compliance, and transparency. For municipalities and local governments, this means your procurement cycles remain compliant with local bylaws, procurement regulations, and governance standards. By embedding these values into daily operations, Process Pro ensures accountability, scalability, and readiness for public sector audits.
Indeed. Thanks, Sheila. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out this purchase order process for us, and something you'll notice immediately off the start is that some of the values we've actually pre-filled, and this is by design specifically for this webinar session. Now, as most of you know, filling out a purchase order, invoice acquisition, and vendor creation is quite a tedious process. And even though this process streamlines it quite a lot, it still is a process that takes some time with correct documentation. So we filled in some of the pre-defaulted fields that we could fill in just to shorten it a slight bit for the session. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to start off with this purchase order process, and I'm going to dive into creating a vendor immediately. So from clicking vendor creation, you'll see that automatically it opens up the process, and I can then go, and all I need to do for this specific one is I need to fill in currency, payment terms, so payment method, and this will map directly into whatever your municipal financial requirements are. So anything that you need in order to put on to vendor compliance, we can update and adjust accordingly.
And we capture required supporting documentation at the vendor onboarding stage. For example, certificates of insurance, WCB, WSIB clearance letters, GST, HST registration details, EFT or void check banking information, and any municipality-specific declarations. These artifacts are stored in Farmer with metadata like vendor ID, document type, effective expiry dates. These can be marked mandatory with validation rules and are immediately visible to approvers. Capturing these records upfront anchors compliance early and feeds the latter compliance step where expiries and renewals are tracked automatically.
Indeed, that's exactly accurate, as you mentioned, Sheila. So from here, I'm going to submit this form because the vendor creation is actually the easy part and the part that is quick and easy to make. So what we're going to do from here is we're actually going to swap over to Business Central. So just to confirm that everything has been populated, and there we can see the vendor I've just created. So as you can see, all this information has pulled through from our form. There's no duplicate entries, no waiting, no insufficient workflows. Everything has been populated with the mandatory fields in mind, knowing that everything from farmer has to come from a certain value field. And because we know exactly on my profile who I am in the farmer process, most of these fields have been auto-populated because it knows exactly what I want to do. So as you can see, we also have a vendor onboarding link on the side, and I'm actually going to open that up, and that is where we actually store all of our metadata inside of Farmer.
Fantastic. And how does that save days of waiting and back and forth emails? The procurement teams can keep moving, finance has accurate data, and the whole process is audible. And importantly, we can configure extensive approval and review steps. We can base those on thresholds like spend categories or department rules, and this can all be set by the municipality. What this will do is this will ensure every workflow aligns with your financial governance frameworks and supports compliance with public sector accountability. So I think that's a really crucial step there. Back to you, Hardis.
Indeed, Sheila. So also something you'll notice is on the right-hand side, we have something called metadata inside of the fields, which is, for example, our vendor number, our vendor name, our registration number, and date created. So these are some of the simple fields we've included inside of this demo, but this can be extended to whichever fields you would need in order to run this specific process within your municipality. So any searchable fields, any process fields that would be used in workflows in order to kick off an automation. And that's actually something that I'm going to swap over to next, is the actual vendor compliance, which is something we're going to visually show. But in general, these are things that we can actually automate throughout the process.
That's brilliant. And before we do that, I think we need to talk about the governance and the perspective from the government. I mean, this creates a permanent audit trail. If, for an example, we had an auditor ask, show me all actions for vendor X, you can pull it up instantly with no manual searching. So beyond audits, this traceability supports internal reviews, risk assessments, and municipal compliance checks. Every action is time-stamped, linked to a user, and tied to a workflow step. This will give your finance, legal, and procurement officers a single source of truth for oversight and public accountability.
So that definitely does help. And if we just look at the vendor documentation compliance that I've opened up for us, while Sheila was explaining some of the positive items that we can have a look at. As you can see, this is a list that we've actually just completed right now. And as you can see, for the specific vendor number that we've just created, we can actually go and search on this vendor specifically. So imagine this list had hundreds or thousands of different vendors on this list. It's easy to search, it's easy to maintain, and any automation, all of these processes can be automated so that a user doesn't need to search for these, but this is just to show that the functionality is available for you. So let's say in this case, I wanted to ask for a renewal of documents that might be close to expiration. I can select these documents and I can say, let's submit them through to make sure that we get the compliance up to date with these documentation.
And you can see from the supporting documents how vendor compliance is built into the process. We can require specific uploads, we can enforce policies, and we can align with industry and government standards. So this guarantees adherence to municipal bylaws, our risk mitigation requirements, and public sector governance expectations. And before we go to the next section, I think it's important to note that every municipality is different. We understand that you all have your own branding, your own logos, and your own verbiage. So absolutely, that is totally customizable within Farmer.
Okay, moving on back to our purchase order. The reason we started out with a purchase order right from the get-go is whenever you're working on a process, you might get halfway and then realize that you might be missing some of the documentation in order to complete said purchase order, which is the nice thing about Farmer, as well as the integration with Business Central, is we've built an ecosystem where everything is integrated and you can pull data from the various systems. So that means at any point in the process, if you need to have a sub-process which supplements data inside of your main process, that is something that can happen at any time. So any of these processes can add in. And for example, if I now go to the vendor name, I can then see this vendor that I've just created. So if I then select that vendor, I'm going to go to shipping type. I'm going to add in shipping type. And the very next thing you'll see is there's an emergency situation. For this webinar, I'd like to drill down into this emergency situation because there's a lot of feature-rich functionality that we can use in regards to the emergency situation. So for the specific one, I'm just going to choose earthquakes, and we've put up a emergency purchase disclaimer, which basically makes sure that whoever submits this purchase order takes accountability for the actions that they perform on this purchase order. This also allows us to bypass the initial approval steps and allows us to immediately get the relief that we need in these emergency situations. So think about floods, think about all these things that could happen at the turn of a dime, and we can assist with helping out our communities by doing these emergency approvals so that we can get the purchase order, get the vendors to assist with whatever they need to do. And that actually takes us into our next step, which is the purchase order line item type. And for this session, I'm going to choose the account non-stock items because it is specific for the emergency situation. So what I'm going to do is under account, I'm going to search inventory. I'm going to select inventory, and under description, I'm going to just choose some of the items we have. And what you'll notice is as we fill in this form, it dynamically changes to cater for the information that is on the form. So for example, immediately you'll see a big red no account budget allocated. So that indicates that for inventory in this test system, we have not allocated a budget for inventory. So that immediately notifies the person filling in this form that there is a discrepancy between Farmer and Business Central, meaning that there needs to be certain steps taken, or in our situation where it's an emergency, these can be noted and moved along because we accept the risk of there being no budget for this inventory item. I'm going to add on another item. So it's also going to be inventory. Okay. So next part of this is you'll actually see the budget analysis, which comes down to this order total, which is about $20,000. And then we have our next field, which is the vendor year to date. Now, since we just created this vendor, we currently won't have any existing data in the vendor year to date, but any of the existing vendors would have details in this section. So think about whether or not your vendor is out of budget. So you've already spent a certain amount on this vendor in the past. Cross departments can set up their own budgets per vendor so that they can ensure they stay within the agreed upon budgets beforehand. You'll also see the next part, which is the vendor budget. So this part we've set up in our test system to be $50,000. Again, it's just for testing purposes. That this can be changed throughout the farmer process to include any of your specific budgets. This can be input from the approval of the vendor throughout the vendor onboarding process. Any part of this information that you would rely on subsequent processes, all of this can be added onto your processes, or you can give us defaults and we can add those values in. Next would be the vendor remaining budget, which would obviously be your current total plus your vendor year to date, and then taken off your vendor budget. So currently we can see that we're still quite well within budget. So let's change that. So let's actually make this so that it's way over budget. So now we can see that we are way over budget, and immediately this would show us that this vendor is over budget. So that is exactly what the behavior we want, where at every step, once we get to certain limits, we trigger information on the form so that the requester of this form can be informed when making decisions, as well as the subsequent approver. They all have the same information available to them right on the form, and it changes as they progress through the process. So I'm going to actually move to the top, and just to show you some of the additional functionality, I'm going to disable the emergency situation. So something you'll notice at the bottom is our submit button, which has changed to submit for approval, and it's over budget. If I go back and I correct this back to original figure, it then automatically changes to say submit within budget. And if I then go back to the top and make this an emergency situation again, it would then clearly state that this is an emergency request. So everything you do on the form is dictated by the rules that's been put in place beforehand. This is in collaboration with the Business Central setup, as well as the farmer form that we've set up.
Fantastic. And I can also see the highlight the supporting documents can also be uploaded here too, Hardis. So they can be either mandatory requirements, or we can have them as ad hoc, depending on your municipal policy. This flexibility is a major selling point. Municipalities can dictate exactly what documents are required, how often they must be refreshed, and it ties it all nicely back to compliance with your municipal bylaws. It will also reduce manual follow-ups, and we all like that. So manual follow-up with some of your vendors, and it ensures every PO is fully supported and builds confidence with your auditors, your council members, and your residents.
So I'm going to submit this emergency request, and we can actually jump over into Business Central to go and review this purchase order.
So we're now going to look at the PO in Business Central, and what's powerful here is the ease of which the PO was created. It was created without effort, without second guessing, and inside Business Central we can immediately see all the compliance details and associated metadata, giving us full transparency and reinforcing governance requirements. And this is really where the story connects with municipal priorities. You can go and show council members, your auditors, or oversight committees exactly how each PO was generated and how it aligns with local bylaws and financial government frameworks. It's not just about speed, it's about accountability, fiscal stewardship, and risk mitigation. So let's think about the confidence that this is going to give both your finance teams, your residents. Every purchase order created is transparent, traceable, and defensible. That assurance is a huge selling point for municipalities looking to strengthen public trust while also simplifying day-to-day procurement.
That's exactly right, Sheila. At the end of the day, all we want to do is we want to make sure that the information we've put in is accurate and that we can trust that the system does the right thing when it processes these types of documentation. And between the secure API of Farmer and Business Central, all of this information is managed. All of it is made sure that the required fields are being filled in correctly. The required fields are moved over into Business Central, and we can actually trust that everything is going according to plan. If there is any issues down the line, there is always escalation paths to make sure anything that do come up as exceptions, like for example, the over budget, is accounted for, and we can escalate that to the appropriate team. Speaking of which, let us go and have a look at our approval of this purchase order that has gone over budget. So I'm going to swap roles and change myself into the approver of this purchase order. So I'm moving from the requester into the approver, and I'm going to have a look as if I am now the approver receiving this document for the first time. So immediately at the top, you'll see a big bright purchase order number, which is visible on the document, and we've placed this at the beginning of the process because that is typically how you would see the purchase order when doing these type of document validations. Immediately you have that number, you can query on that number, and this number actually gets sent out to the vendor as well in this emergency situation, so that they can use that number in order to allocate the invoices back for payment to make sure that these relief efforts actually get to the people that it's supposed to. So from an approval level, this can now be reviewed, gone through, and none of this information is editable anymore. Everything has been locked down to make sure that nothing has changed. I can review any supporting documents from an approval level to make sure that everything is in alignment. So moving on to the office use section, this is now where the PO approval actually happens, where I can make my decision to say whether or not to approve this purchase order or reject. For sake of display, I'm going to reject this out of the start, and immediately I can see a rejection reason. So this means I can actually send this back to the initiator to say, you know what, actually there has been issues on the specific vendor, or there has been an issue with this allocation, change it to something else, because not all requests that come through are perfect, and maybe they need to update something on their end. So I'm going to move over to approval, and once I do that, I can sign as the approver, and I'm going to in my name.
Brilliant. And this is where municipalities see real value. So our approvals are transparent, they're traceable, and they're aligned again with your local bylaws. You get the speed to keep services moving, but also the accountability to demonstrate that funds are being spent in accordance with policy and financial controls. And our customers absolutely love this.
Indeed, and that's 100% right. So many stories of municipalities wanting this approval step in there just to make sure that everything does fall in alignment. And like we've shown previously with the farmer repository, everything is saved and securely documented with metadata. So anytime any auditor does question or does follow up on any of the information, everything is available with a quick search throughout the process. So speaking of the vendor requisition, I'm going to move on to that section now, which now that we've done the purchase order, our vendor received the purchase order and they would like to help out with this emergency situation. They've now sent their invoices through to us to reconcile, and we can now do that. So from the first point, we would then select our vendor. From the drop-down list, we would select our purchase order, and this is the purchase order we've just processed. Because this is the only one for government frameworks, in this specific scenario, it would automatically just select that purchase order for us. The next step is such a crucial part, which is a bulk invoice upload. So we can actually go and allocate multiple invoices onto this one. And since we integrate with Business Central directly, we exactly know what is on the purchase order. So we can select those line items directly from here in order to allocate the invoices. Something you'll notice is the next section, which is the previously captured total, which means that you could do a purchase requisition in multiple stages, as some vendors do send their invoices in batches, meaning that you might get partial allocation at certain stages. So you can always go allocate what you have so that the workload doesn't increase throughout the work day. You can make sure you always keep up to date with everything that's coming in, and you can make sure that everything's up to date. So if we were to partially capture this requisition, it would show that previously we've captured X amount of value for this purchase order. We then also have the current batch total, which is our values of the invoices on the right-hand side, and then also our PO total, which pulls directly from Business Central in order to show us what the value should be. Now, again, same as before, we have checks and balances. Even if it's out by $1, it would immediately tell us that there is something wrong and it doesn't match up. And the nice thing about this is it would immediately flag it in order to send it to an additional approval step. So even if this is correct and that is what's on the invoices, we can send this through to the finance team to make sure that everything is aligned and that they're happy with this push through of finance. So for now, I'm just going to move this back. And we can basically submit this form as is. There's no manual line by line issues that can be brought up. Everything is linked back to Business Central directly. So from an AP approval side, we can immediately see where the issues are as well.
And that also means, Hardis, that your finance teams can reconcile faster. They can close months sooner and provide counsel with a clean audit trail. So it supports timely reporting, going back to the compliance with financial bylaws, and again, giving those municipalities the tools to maintain the public trust.
And that is 100% correct. That's the most important part, is making sure that trust is there between the municipalities, their constituents, as well as with the financial team inside of the municipality. So that is what we bring to this process as well, from a farmer into a Business Central integration. So just to wrap up our current setup, we've talked today in full cycle of the purchase order initiation from Process Pro, the vendor creation in Business Central, the repository and metadata informer, compliance with expiration tracking, budget checks and approval routing, invoice processing with bulk upload and automatic validation, and then most important, the emergency flow that posts immediately yet still routes for approval to make sure everything is compliant.
And I think, Hardis, what you've done here is you've shown how the business value is clear, faster procurement cycles, reduced compliance risk, and a single source of truth across procurement and finance. For local governments and municipalities, this means transparency, accountability, and confidence that every dollar spent is governed by the right controls and aligned with public sector bylaws. Brilliant. So I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. Okay, so I'm just going to go into our Q&A here. Okay, I've got one for you, Hardis. It's, how does Farmer integrate with Business Central?
Okay, excellent. So that's actually quite an extensive answer to give. But what I'm going to do, just for sake of time, basically what we do is we use secure APIs to push and pull data throughout the system as you're progressing through the form, to make sure that whatever you're filling in on the information on the form is actually synced with what is in Business Central. So to make sure that the vendor and purchase order information in the specific example is consistent across both systems, without having to manually enter anything between the two systems. So as you fill in information, we basically sync the two systems as they go, so that when you hit that submit, it's already inside of Business Central and all the information is there for any other process that would pull similar type of information at any second.
So
brilliant. We've got lots of questions coming in here. The next one is, what happens if a vendor record already exists in Business Central?
Okay, so one of the main things we were looking at when building this farmer integration into Business Central was specifically the duplication, because that is generally one of the biggest failure points of an integration system like this. And what we've actually done is we've gone and interrogated Business Central to find all of its unique values. For example, things like tax ID, things like, for example, ID number of an employee, and all of these unique things that we use on a daily basis, we use that to make sure everything stays unique. So we haven't gone and added in additional things to try and make it unique. We stick with what is unique inside of Business Central, and we pull that information back into Farmer and force the users to fill in certain fields to make sure that everything stays unique without duplication.
Excellent, excellent answer. Another one coming in here is, how does the system handle compliance document expirations?
On that specific one, as we showed earlier on the vendor document compliance, there is multiple ways to actually handle compliance document expirations. So you can handle it manually, the way we just showed, where you can validate and manually go through and just request that those documents be updated and sent back into the Farmer repository. Or you can have, for example, the fields inside of the documents. For example, we had a field called document creation, and we can also add in fields for expiration dates on certain documents. So we have a workflow in the back end that always checks. So let's say, for example, your driver's license, if your driver's license was to expire in, let's say, 180 days from now, we would send you a notification to say, just note that your driver's license is expiring 180 days from now. Or if it's 60 days, we would say, listen, we see that your driver's license is 60 days away. Generally, this process takes about 30 days to complete. So you need to make sure you get to a timely manner to renew any documentation that takes some time to complete. And all that information sits with municipalities, and they give us all that information on their various documents so that we can say, this is the specific process flow for each of that documentation and the requirements beyond their expiration.
Fantastic, brilliant answer. Another one from one of our participants is, when an approver is on holiday, can the approval authority be reassigned to someone else?
Yes, so the nice thing about Farmer is it's quite dynamic, and it's built for change in business. It's built to make sure that the process keeps on moving forward. So we generally assign everything into teams, and from there, anyone would be able inside of that team to take that process and review it, approve it. So, for example, I mentioned earlier about the finance team. So let's say, for example, you have a team of 3 people inside of your finance team, and something does come in for finance approval. You can then, from any 3 of those people, they can open their tasks, and all 3 of them will see the tasks. The moment one of them takes the task for themselves, it would disappear off the general list for the other 2 people, but they still can see it under team tasks. So it just falls out of their default tasks for the day. So from there, they can then assign it to themselves, and we can add in additional logic to say, if this task has not been completed within X amount of time, we then reassign it back to the team, or we use flags that basically allow us to set the urgency of the task. So let's say, for example, it's an urgent task. That means that we want to be able to process this within a few hours. If not, we move it on to the next person so that they can approve this task. So there's multiple ways for us to structure this. It all depends on what works within your municipality.
Brilliant. Fantastic. We've another, we're getting so many fantastic questions here, Hardis. I've got another one here to say, can vendor details be cross-checked with relevant regulatory bodies?
That is a good question. And yes, we could definitely do that. It all depends on where that data sits. So for example, if that data is accessible by Farmer, then 100% we would be able to do that. From an audit perspective, we have users that we can specifically set up for auditors. to be able to access this from anywhere, wherever they're sitting, and they should be able to access the data on the vendor side as well in order to check the compliance and so forth on any of this documentation.
We have a few questions coming in about how we integrate with different vendors, and I think one of the questions asked is, how secure is the data transfer between all the different systems?
So we take security quite strongly on whenever we're building a system, and we generally use either industry standard or above. We never settle for mediocre solutions. We always think security first, access first. What are we actually getting out of the system, and what is the repercussions behind this data? Is this data something that people can actually use that they're not supposed to be able to? And we take it from there to say, let's strengthen this process. So specifically on this Business Central integration, we only use secure APIs, which all sit behind firewalls and security layers that it's close to impossible for these to be interacted with outside of the developers that actually set it up. So even you sitting in the former system can't see any of that. You can't interact with those backend systems at all. There's no way for you to get it, onto any of that information. And that's, again, like I mentioned, like we take it really serious because we know that your information is valuable, and we want to comply and make sure that everything we do is of top-notch security.
Fantastic. Another question coming in here is, what happens when an invoice doesn't match the PO?
So currently there's a few things we've done, and currently that is sort of up to interpretation at each municipality, because municipalities are quite different and how they want to manage the specific things. So some municipalities don't want it to be any discrepancies. One or two of them are fine with like a percentage-based difference, and all of that is set up at scoping with the municipality to try and figure out what is their process and how do they do it. So we take those requirements and then we tighten up all the boundaries, all the system variables to make sure all the exceptions are handled. So we start from the front and we say, what about this? What about this process? What can we do with this process? And because we've delivered so many of these type of solutions, we know a lot of the questions to ask, and all we need is just the information to say, yes, please add this in, or no, this is fine, leave it as is. And municipalities are always welcome to add in more questions as well. So we can never say that we know everything about these processes, but we're more than happy to learn anything that municipalities would like to add.
Brilliant. I think we've got time for one more question. What reporting capabilities are available?
Farmer has its own set of default reporting systems that we can use, but there's also additional reporting systems we can use from our PM side, which they can suggest. And again, this is very much on a municipal case-by-case basis. I think there's no one solution that fits all, which is why government frameworks as a whole has multiple layers of solutions that they can provide. We tailor to whatever the requirement of the municipality is, and we make sure that what they want gets to them in the best possible way. So that's going to be my answer for that one, because there's no set way. There's not one answer I can give you.
I think you've handled all the questions that have been thrown at you regarding all the different parts of the vendor onboarding presentation that you did today, Harda. So thank you so much. I learned a lot today too. we'd love if anyone has any more questions, we can take them offline. Our GFW team are happy to organise one-to-one demos and presentations with you all if you want to get a deeper dive into what we showed you today, and all feedback is greatly appreciated, and we want to thank you all for taking the time to join us today, and we look forward to sending you our next Lunch and Learn, which we will be doing quite regularly. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. And I'd really like to thank everyone specifically for being here, because without you, I don't get the opportunity to build processes that do the things it does. So again, thanks everyone for being here. We really appreciate it.